That woman told my wife to take off her hospital gown right there on our porch while she was still recovering from spinal surgery. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just stared at her and knew deep down that I was about to destroy her entire HOA board with nothing but truth and documentation. Because some people don't understand compassion until it costs them their power. My name's Dr. Lenrick Vale. I'm a neurosurgeon, and my wife Evan was still in rehab after a brutal spinal reconstruction. I'd built her a custom recliner solid oak designed to cradle her back just right so she could sit outside and breathe without pain. The porch was her sanctuary. But to our HOA Vice President Regina Paul Kraftoft, it was an eyesore. That morning she showed up in her gray slacks and her HOA badge like it was a sheriff's star. Clipboard in hand, eyes scanning my wife like she was some code violation. "This is your final warning," she said. "Outdoor attire must reflect community health and harmony." My wife tightened the blanket around her shoulders, pale and trembling. Regina took a step closer, holding her phone. "I'll need to document this." I moved between them. "You're going to stop right now," I said, my voice low. She tilted her head, half smiling. "Or what?" "Or I'll do what I do best," I told her. "Build a case. Around humiliation, negligence, retaliation." Across the street, my neighbor Jasper stood with his phone half raised, pretending to text, but clearly recording. Regina's eyes flicked toward him, then back to me. She lowered her phone, muttered something about daily fines, and stomped off down the driveway. That night, a letter showed up folded neatly like it was a damn parking ticket. "Notice of community violation," it read. "Resident observed in medically suggestive attire. Fine $100 per day." There was a handwritten note at the bottom. "Please respect the community's visual standards. We are a neighborhood, not a rehabilitation center." My hands didn't shake, but my jaw did. I'd seen people die with more dignity than that letter gave my wife. The next morning I watched from the kitchen window as Yvonne sat on the porch again. Her blanket slipped just slightly, the knot of her gown visible. 3 houses down, Regina stood beside another neighbor phone, half hidden. I felt my chest burn. I stepped outside, sat beside my wife, and said softly, "They're watching again." She smiled faintly. "Let them." A few days later, the HOA sent photos time-stamped blurry invasive. They'd made her a case file. Then came the meeting notice, compliance review session, attendance mandatory. I went alone. The annex was cold chairs in a half circle. Regina stood at the front like she owned the place. Beside her, holding a clipboard and looking at the floor, was Maren Joss, a young woman I recognized. I'd mentored her in nursing school years ago. "Dr. Vale," Regina said smoothly. "Thank you for coming." "I wasn't given a choice," I said. She launched into her speech about visual harmony and aesthetic consistency. Then she mentioned porch use suspension for repeat offenders. Porch suspension like she could revoke sunlight. I raised my hand. "Under what authority?" "The board reserves the right." "No," I cut in. "You're quoting from an unratified clause. Clause 8.3b was never passed, never filed with the county registrar." I checked the time-stamped filings myself. Silence. Maren's hand tightened on the clipboard until the plastic creaked. She didn't look up, but I saw the truth flicker across her face. Regina just smiled, that smug, brittle smile. "That's your interpretation." "No," I said. "That's the law." When the meeting ended, I stayed behind. Maren lingered too, pretending to sort papers. "It wasn't ratified, was it?" I asked quietly. Her voice cracked. "No." Regina added it herself. "No vote, no record. I thought it was temporary." She looked down. "Your wife. She helped me once, during my first trauma rotation. She made me sit down before I fainted." I nodded. "She still talks about that." Maren swallowed hard. "Meet me tomorrow. Library parking lot, no cameras." The next evening she handed me a folded sheet of paper, handwritten sharp, slanted letters. It was Regina's notes from a board-only meeting in 2020. 8.3b. Visible recovery gear and hospital wear not permitted in porch view zones. Impacts image. Impacts image. That's what my wife's pain was to her, a blemish on the neighborhood's brand. That night I called Mira Tomlin, a housing and ADA attorney I knew from the hospital. She answered on the second ring. "I saw that HOA clip going around," she said. If that clause isn't filed or voted on, they've got no authority. Send me everything. By dawn, I'd scanned the paper, pulled the digital records, and cross-checked every county filing. Nothing. Clause 8.3b didn't legally exist. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived, a new clause. Emergency Governance Provision, 11.4. It gave the board temporary powers to remove anything conflicting with visual harmony during community distress. It was dated April 2020, the pandemic year, and supposedly gave them the right to confiscate property. My wife's chair was next. I drove to the county office myself. The filing shelves were dusty, the records clerk tired. We checked every page from that year. No provision 11.4. It was fake. Another forgery. That night I emailed everything to Mira. Subject line, false clause enforcement. Urgent. She replied 20 minutes later. You've got them. Don't show your hand yet. I'm drafting the state complaint. But I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I sat in the recliner beside my wife, listening to the creak of the wood and the slow rhythm of her breathing. That chair wasn't furniture, it was defiance made tangible. A week later, Marin showed up again, this time with a USB drive. Everything the board's been hiding, she said. Internal memos, unfiled drafts, notes from 2020. Regina's been rewriting history. Her hands shook as she passed it to me. If they find out, I'm done. I told her, you already did the hard part. Inside that drive was a document labeled Revised Aesthetic Enforcement Plan. The opening line hit like a hammer. A place where wellness is implied, not displayed. They had actually written that. I sent it to Mira immediately. She called back within minutes. This isn't just discrimination, she said. It's a cover-up. You've got intent. But the next morning, Marin's name disappeared from the HOA portal. Legal secretary role under review. They'd erased her. That's when I realized this wasn't about one couple anymore. It was about everyone they'd silenced. Jasper helped me trace the document metadata. It was created on Regina's MacBook. But the last person to open it wasn't her. It was the HOA admin, Timothy Willis. He'd added a note. No need to file internal standard. That line turned negligence into fraud. I dropped a sealed envelope on his desk, a printed summary of the evidence, Jasper's signature, and one sentence. You're now complicit. Speak carefully. That same night, an anonymous post appeared in our neighborhood forum. Just one line from Regina's secret plan. A place where wellness is implied, not displayed. It spread like wildfire. People started posting their own HOA violations, photos of oxygen tanks, wheelchair ramps, chemo chairs. Then someone uploaded a photo of my wife's recliner with the caption, "This is what healing looks like." By morning, the community had shifted. They weren't whispering anymore. They were angry. Regina called a private board meeting for Saturday. No email, no agenda, just whispers. But I knew. She was trying to regroup. I printed everything. The documents, the trace logs, the Georgia HOA code. I even included a photo of my wife sitting on that porch face tilted toward the sun. She looked fragile but unbroken. When Saturday came, Yvonne insisted on coming with me. You're not doing this alone, she said. The clubhouse was half empty. Only the loyalists showed. I walked straight to the podium. Regina stiffened. This isn't an open session, she said. Then there's no reason I can't speak, I answered. Yvonne stepped up beside me, leaning on her cane. The room went still. This, I said, holding up the first page, is Clause 8.3b. It was never voted on, never filed. This, I raised another paper, is Provision 11.4, also fake. And this, I held up the final sheet, is your handwriting, Regina. Your notes about removing recovery equipment because it impacts image. Her face went pale. Who gave you that? I got it legally, I said, and it's been verified. She tried to speak, but I cut her off. You didn't protect this neighborhood. You humiliated people for being human. Timothy Willis spoke up from the back. He's right, he said quietly. There was no resident vote. I checked the records myself. Then Marin stood. She'd slipped in unnoticed, holding her folder tight. The clause was inserted after the meeting adjourned, she said. There was no quorum. It was illegal. The room erupted. One neighbor shouted about her granddaughter's feeding pump. Another talked about being warned for a walker ramp. Every story peeled away another layer of Regina's mask. Then Elaine, shaking but steady, walked to the center of the room. She unfolded her chair, that same recliner, and sat down in silence. No one moved, and then from the back, someone clapped. Just once, then another, and another. Regina's mouth tightened. She gathered her papers and stormed out. 2 days later, a letter arrived, this time from the Georgia State Office of HOA Compliance. It declared Clause 8.3b unenforceable and Provision 11.4 null and void. All fines revoked. Any future violations based on similar rules would trigger state review. I read it twice, then handed it to my wife. She sat in the recliner, sunlight catching the edge of her scarf. Her hands trembled not from weakness but from release. They didn't just reverse it, she said. They erased it. Regina disappeared. No statement, no defense. Timothy resigned quietly. Marin became interim president. Her first policy, a new Clause 1 protecting recovery and disability visibility in all HOA-managed spaces. She called it the Elaine Clause. And the chair. It's still there, still creaking softly on the porch when the wind moves through the wood. They tried to erase it. Instead, they built a monument. Because healing isn't ugly, and dignity isn't negotiable.